Hi and welcome. My name is Julieanne Kost, and in the next few minutes we're going to take a look at how we can create a high dynamic range image using Camera Raw. Now, prior to this release, we could create a high dynamic range image, but Camera Raw would have to hand that file off to Photoshop and render it as a pixel-based document. Now in Camera Raw 9.0, we can create a HDR image, high dynamic range image, containing all of your information in your shadows, midtones, and highlights as a DNG file, which will enable us to maintain all of the editing flexibility of that raw file. So let's start here in Bridge. I've got these 3 exposures selected, and I'll click to edit in Camera Raw. Over in the film strip area, I'm going to select all of the different bracketed exposures and then use the flyout menu to merge to HDR. Camera Raw is going to create a preview and give us a number of options on the right-hand side. The Align Image options will automatically align multiple exposures that were captured perhaps without a tripod. This feature is also going to crop off any uneven areas around the image. Auto Tone is going to automatically enhance the resulting image based on the dynamic range of the combined exposures. Even if you enable this, it's completely non-destructive, so we can refine this once the DNG file is created. The De-Ghost option has 3 different low, medium, and high options, as well as an off option. This feature helps identify different regions in the image that change between exposures. So maybe leaves blowing in the wind, or in this case, I have a reflection of a person in the window here. Then it makes sure that any area that did change is filled in from a single exposure, so you don't see any ghosting or semi-transparency of objects in your image. We can see that there was some ghosting here, and we've got the red overlay being displayed. If I want to change the color of the overlay, I can click in the color swatch and change the color. I can also choose whether I want to see the affected or unaffected areas. For now, I'll leave it red by clicking on Cancel, and I can toggle this on and off using the keyboard shortcut Y to toggle on and off the overlay. As soon as we click Merge, and then we save the file to the desired location, Camera Raw is going to start creating that high dynamic range image as a background task. We can immediately see the image here and we can start working on it. So the first thing that you need to know is that even if you've applied adjustments to each individual exposure, not all of those adjustments will be carried over to the merged document. So let's say, for example, you've applied a lens correction or you've converted the image to black and white. That's no problem. Those kinds of changes will be incorporated into the merged HDR. Of course, they're non-destructive, so you can always change your mind later, but there are adjustments, for example, exposure and contrast, that are not going to be carried over. Likewise, none of the local adjustments will be carried over when you merge the individual files, because we're using a different algorithm to actually merge those separate exposures to create the one high dynamic range image. So my advice would be to minimize the amount of time you spend correcting individual exposures. Instead, merge your HDR image first and then make your changes to that merged file. So let's go ahead and make a few changes here. I'm going to move over to our lens profile correction. I'll enable that. I'll also remove any chromatic aberration, and I'll move to the manual area and just do an auto upright to straighten the building a bit. I'll also move to the crop tool and then drag out a crop marquee so that I can crop off that little bit of the telephone pole on the left-hand side and tap Return or Enter in order to apply that. Of course, like all of the changes that I'm making here, all of these are non-destructive. Now I'm going to move back to the basic panel. I'm going to change the temperature a little bit, just warming up the entire image. And then when I move the exposure slider, you'll notice that instead of being limited to negative or positive 4 stops, I can actually go down to negative or positive 10 stops. So there's really quite an increase in the dynamic range here. I'm going to move the exposure slider down to the left here, a little bit too dark for my shadows, but that's okay because I've noticed here that I can move my shadow slider up a little bit. And if I wanted to use one of my local adjustments, for example, maybe the radial filter, then I could click to decrease the exposure outside of the radial filter while resetting all of the other options, and also desaturating outside of the radial filter. Then I'll click and drag in the center of the building, just repositioning it a little bit so that we darken down all of the areas and desaturate the areas, drawing your eye into the middle of the image. As you can see, all of the changes here that I've made to this HDR image are only affecting the one image that I have selected. I just wanted to point that out in case there was any confusion. This merged HDR is not tied to any of the exposures that were used to create it. When I'm finished, I'll go ahead and click Done. We can see the resulting file here in Adobe Bridge. And there you have it, an easy way for making a raw HDR image in Camera Raw 9.0. I'm Julieanne Kost. Thanks for watching.